Welcome to the April 8th, 2025 episode of The Energy Show. I'm journalist Markham Hislop, and the working title for today's show is Letting Electrons Free as Part of a New Canadian Economy. My guest today is Bruce Lourie, president of the Ivey Foundation and chair of the Transition Accelerator. Bruce, always good to see you, man.
Yeah, great to see you, Markham. Thanks for having me.
You have for viewers who aren't aware, and that'll probably be every one of you, we launched, and by we I mean Energy Media, launched a campaign today called Canada 2050. Add value to resources, electrify the process of extraction and processing, build infrastructure. And what we're going to talk today with Bruce is exactly consistent with that strategy. In fact, when I read his op-ed in the Globe and Mail from March 20th, I was tickled pink because it's exactly what's required. Bruce, why don't you give us an overview of that op-ed argument?
Sure, yeah. So the basic idea, Markham, is that in order for us to decarbonize our economy, it's in many ways kind of a simple idea. We have to stop burning fossil fuel, and the way we stop burning fossil fuel is to electrify most things that currently use fossil fuel. But what that means is we actually have to have the electricity to power all the things that we're currently doing with fossil fuels. So that means heating homes and heating buildings and cars and trucks and things like that. And as a country, we just haven't really gotten our head around what it's going to take to provide enough clean electricity to allow us to electrify our economy. And so, I mean, I started thinking about this quite a few years ago. And it's just been frustrating, essentially, to watch the fact that as a country, we just haven't really gotten ahead of, or even caught up to this idea. And then what's happened recently with Trump and tariffs is suddenly everyone's saying, "Oh, gee, maybe we have to look at our internal borders and systems and start trading more effectively inside the country." And then, of course, that just got me a little frustrated, realizing that, as usually what motivates me, is as a country, we've done a terrible job of breaking down the barriers to electricity trade between the provinces. So most of the electricity trade in Canada goes north-south, and that's, for pretty sound economic reasons. But if we want to be a country, A, that decarbonizes in a more cost-effective way, builds a more reliable electricity system, does it in a way that's more cost effective for consumers, we need to start trading electricity across the provinces.
We do. And I want to add another angle to your argument for decarbonization, because this is the focus of our journalism here at Energy Media, and that is the economic argument. So we know, you and I have talked enough, Bruce, know our argument, which is that clean energy technologies like wind and solar and batteries and EVs and heat pumps and so on have been on the bottom of the S curve for decades. They now have, around 2020, passed the inflection point. Now they're on the hockey stick growth. And essentially, between now and 2050, this is the era of electricity. Don't take my word for it. That's what the International Energy Agency said. The end of the age of oil, the beginning of the age of electricity. And what that means really is that electric technologies are more efficient and lower cost than their fossil fuel equivalents. It's cheaper to heat a home, like in our house, with a heat pump and to cool it than it is with a conventional furnace and an air conditioner. It's more efficient, and the electricity costs are really low. So we have part of adapting to Trump's economic pressure is electrifying and doing things better, and then electrifying what it is that we do. That'll make us competitive in a way that in order to be, well, competitive moving forward into this age of electricity. Well, that was quite a rant. Okay. One of the things that's really been apparent to me over the years, as because we've covered this story, is the Constitution of Canada says energy is the jurisdiction of the provinces. And so we basically have 10 little fiefdoms, 13 if you include the territories. And the grids haven't been that bad as a rule. Quebec and BC and Manitoba, I mean, there's lots of really sound grids, but they don't talk to each other at all, or very little.
Yeah. No, I mean that's exactly the issue. And although Trump has prompted us to think this way, really we should have been thinking this way for much longer. So, and and one of the reasons, frankly, I think that we haven't as a country is, the reality is we've got among the cheapest electricity in the world, we've got among the most reliable electricity in the world, and we have among the cheapest electricity in the world. And that's kind of the trifecta of a good electricity system. So, I mean, there hasn't, I get why there hasn't been a ton of motivation to want to do this historically. But things are very different now for a whole lot of reasons. And one of the big reasons is just to link it to your themes, Markham, is we have to build a whole lot of new infrastructure and we have to build more power. And so we can do that either in an efficient, cost-effective way, which is through broader systems, collaborating across bigger regions, or we can do it in a way that we've been doing it, for the last 100 years, which is, as you say, and as I said in my op-ed, in these provincial fiefdoms, and you can still have, and there's no reason constitutionally that you can't have more interconnect, more trade. I mean, that really, the Constitution doesn't tell you that you can't trade with your neighbors. And in fact, what you see in most of the Western world is very similar examples to Canada, where you've got in Australia individual states with their own electricity systems, in the United States individual states with electricity systems, or individual countries in Europe. But they've actually created these structures where not only, and this is, a lot of people think this is just about building transmission lines. This isn't about building transmission lines. This is about integrated planning in a larger region to determine where are the best electricity resources to be developed, where are the major, say, demand loads, and then how do you connect all of that together in a way that's going to save money. So we're going to be investing a lot of money, and the question really is, do we want to invest, X, or do we want to invest 2X? And we should hopefully want to be focusing on the 1X model, which right now Canada isn't set up to do.
Right. I've interviewed people like Dr. Chris Bataille, who's an energy economist, who said that developed economies like Canada will need 2X or 3X more electricity by 2050 as we go through this process. Yeah. And one of the advantages, and just to illustrate your point, so I live in Western Canada in British Columbia. We're a hydro province. 3 provinces away is Manitoba, also a big hydro province. In between are the 2 prairie provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, that have the best wind and solar resources in the country. And for a long time, people have been arguing, why don't we integrate all of those together so that when the wind is blowing, the sun is shining, Alberta and Saskatchewan can help power Alberta and BC. And when that's not happening, then the BC and Manitoba can ship hydropower into the prairie provinces and trade back and forth, and everybody's more reliable and everybody's cleaner and everybody's lower cost. It just makes perfect sense. And the political opposition, my understanding is politics is at the root of why we don't do that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So the way these individual systems are set up, so if you're Hydro-Quebec or Manitoba Hydro or BC Hydro, your mandate is to provide electricity for the people who live in the province. They're in most cases outside of Alberta and parts of the Ontario system and maybe in Nova Scotia. We really have publicly owned utilities that are running the system, and so that gives, you'd think, creates the opportunity where a government would say, hey, well, we have a mandate to just provide electricity to our customers or our citizens of the province. But wouldn't it be nice if our mandate actually considered the lowest cost option for our citizens, as opposed to the option that is only controlled by us? And that's the political part that's been hard to break through, right? So the individual provinces like to control their own, politically, they like to control the electricity system, even though that's not the most cost-effective way of doing it. So what you want to do is some kind of hybrid or balance between retaining, the authority and autonomy of a province, but basically creating these regional, and as you said exactly, if we had a regional planning body where the electricity managers, planners, et cetera, from BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba all got together and said, hey, let's look at all of our resources, and then let's figure out what is the best way to manage the electricity system for all the people working across the provinces. And then, of course, there's going to be north-south interconnects as well. That's ultimately going to be part of it. But at the end of the day, if you have that kind of coordinated planning, people will be able to come up with cheaper electricity, more reliable electricity. Alberta is unique, right? In that, maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But anyway, your point is exactly right, and that applies as well with Quebec and Ontario, and Quebec and the Maritimes. Quebec has massive hydroelectricity reserves. They can be utilized to offset, wind and solar and other sources of power. If you imagine you start building a ton of offshore wind off of Nova Scotia, PEI, suddenly you got a big balancing system with offshore wind, maybe some onshore solar, hydroelectricity, some other backup stuff here and there. And then you just got a better electricity system.
I interviewed economist Ken Fellows from the University of Calgary a few years ago, and he said, look, a megawatt hour of hydropower is far more valuable when it's used to back up intermittent renewables like wind and solar than it is if you just sell it to a customer, because it has as storage, there's a higher value attached to that.
Yeah.
And as if you're just selling it as to be consumed, it's a lower value. So we're really not using the assets we have to create the highest value that we could.
Yeah, no, that's right. And and that's again another benefit of having a larger area in which you're planning electricity. In fact, that's almost fundamental to the whole idea, is you're trying to figure out where are the highest value resources and how are they best utilized to extract that value. And as you say, in Saskatchewan, one of the arguments that they use is, well, we can't build a whole lot of wind and solar because we have no backup. Well, of course, if you have a backup option with another jurisdiction, then that becomes much easier. And really, this is all about flexibility, sort of flexibility and maximizing flexibility and opportunity by expanding the resources within a system.
I interviewed Hiley is his last name. He managed a co-op association, electricity co-op association in Colorado and a couple of the other adjoining states. And he said, we've got so much solar now in the US that essentially we chase the sun as it sets, so that as they trade back and forth. So those, like, say, if you're on the East Coast, the sun is setting early, and then you're drawing power from the West Coast where they're making cheap solar. And he says it really works quite well, and it does, because of these overlaid planning organizations that the Americans have come up with years ago that have worked really well to get everybody coordinated.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be a massive area. Even you talk to people in Ontario, how the electricity systems, managed through the IESO. They're, as people there have said to me, it might be sunny in this part of Ontario and cloudy in this part of Ontario, but we're still getting solar, or it might be windy here and sunny here. And so what it allows you to do, and this is a concept that I think people often struggle with, but it allows you to overbuild really low cost electricity supply, because the cost of installing solar and wind these days is so much less than any other source that you can actually overbuild the system to account for that kind of intermittency in one part of the region that is balanced with abundance in another part.
There's a very interesting paper just came out yesterday from the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, and it's talking about a shift of systems, energy systems, And it said, when you have fossil fuels where you have to combust something, create energy from combustion, then make it work, it's very inefficient. Like you take your car engine, for example, or
Yeah.
even if you had a gas power plant, it's still, you're not getting anywhere close to maybe 50, 60% efficiency. But when you do it with a technology like a wind or solar panels, wind turbine, you get much higher efficiency. And over time, as you build out those systems, your problem is not the scarcity of the resource like it is with coal, oil, and gas. It's the abundance of the resource.
Yeah.
And it takes a big shift in our thinking because we thought this way for like millennia, that there's never enough energy. And now all of a sudden the potential exists to have as much as we want and more. And how do we then organize our economy around that to maximize the benefit for everybody?
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And the numbers even on efficiency are much worse than you're stating, Markham. It's closer to 30%, even just when you're burning it, and then you add in all of the production losses, the transport losses. You're looking at basically, best case scenario is about 2 units of energy per 10 units that they are useful per 10 units that are created in fossil fuels. And with the low cost of things like solar, especially in certain parts of the world where it's really available. And I hear people talking about efficiency of solar panels. I mean, efficiency isn't really a concept that's relevant when it's abundant and free, right? So I mean, you worry about efficiency when you're paying a lot for the input of, say, natural gas. But if you have unlimited input of the resource, efficiency is kind of a pointless concept because it's just so abundant.
Let's talk about that for a minute because I've done a number of interviews about perovskite being integrated into solar panels. And so the idea for anybody in our audience that isn't familiar with it, perovskite's a mineral, I guess, and you can overlay it over the silicone. Don't ask me how they do it, but you combine it with, so you go from 22% efficiency to maybe like 30, maybe even a maximum efficiency of 35%. Now all of a sudden you need as many panels or you get more out of the panels you do have, like a lot more electricity. And on top of that, there's other innovations coming in things like thin film solar. So now all of a sudden you're turning windows into solar panels and you're turning fences and walls and all sorts of things. So the ability to capture energy from the sun with technologies is galloping ahead far faster than we can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is where the benefit ultimately is just producing it at much lower cost. And so the cost curves of solar panels, of course, have just been mind-boggling over the last couple of decades, far exceeding the drop in cost, far exceeding what anyone was predicting. And in some instances, you could have a higher efficiency panel is going to be beneficial if you're constrained, say, on a rooftop, then you've got more energy per unit, or area that you're installing the panels. But if you're just looking at, say, putting in massive solar fields in a desert, again, you've got cost efficiencies, but really it is a different concept. But anyway, it's at the end of the day, the point here is that what we want to be doing is allowing for the most cost-effective resources to be maximized in a system, and the greater the size of the system, the easier it is to do that.
One of the things that came out of Trump's tariff war is he's dragging the economy backwards. In many ways, it's like the ideas come from the 19th century, but he's trying to reintroduce manufacturing that really economically should be somewhere else. The cost structure of the U.S. economy just doesn't make any sense. So while the Americans are grappling with that, what a perfect time for Canada to say, okay, we can re-engineer our economy so it's different. It's more electric and it goes east and west. And we build the infrastructure to do that. And we add value to our resources. And we do a whole bunch of things that we weren't incentivized to do when we were tightly integrated with the Americans. And all we cared about was shipping raw materials out north and south. And the place that this has to start, in my opinion, Bruce, and that's why I really appreciated your op-ed, is between our ears. We think really poorly about energy. And I know that because I interview experts in Asia and Europe and even the US. And the conversation there is so different. It's light years ahead of what we're doing in Canada. And I think we've just been held back by our own success with our electricity system to some extent.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the line I used is we're, we're rather complacent here when it comes to thinking about the future, and and frankly, it's just because of our history of abundant resources, right? So, but we have a terrible track record of, secondary or tertiary manufacturing and processing and exporting. We ship out raw logs and we ship out raw bitumen, and it's so the future, as you're saying, actually gives us an opportunity to think about, do we want to be shipping, raw minerals to people, or do we want to be manufacturing batteries and cars and selling products to people? So certainly the Trump tariff situation, we can't take that lightly. It's a big problem, but hopefully what it'll do, and at least what we're reading about for now, is people recognizing that, again, we've been kind of, sitting on our hands for 40 or 50 years in a pretty easy, simplistic economy of, the classic hewers of wood and drawers of water. So, if all of this, the tariff situation and I was going to say threats, but they're not threats; they're real. Kind of is a bit of the kick in the pants that we need in this country to think more about how to become a more sophisticated manufacturing and exporting nation. Then that'll be good for us.
I've done episodes on Mark Carney's and the Liberal Party's economic strategy, and it's very different than the conservative one. The conservative one is more in line with some conservative values like cutting taxes and so on, and some of it is aligned with Alberta, build pipelines and LNG plants, and is really a continuation of the economy we have as opposed to what you and I are talking about. Carney's got the right principles. He doesn't have a strategy yet. He hasn't put any meat on the bones. And it's election campaign. I suppose he could be
Yep.
forgiven for that. But I don't think we should wait for Mark Carney or any government to come up with these ideas. And that's why we launched Canada 2050, is because it's time for the Canadians to step up and especially to push back against the incumbents, the incumbent oil companies, the incumbent utilities, the incumbent regulators, all of those forces that want to just do what we've always done with different customers.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it's maybe not a word you think of a lot, but we certainly use it a lot in our work, which is the idea of incumbents. And incumbents are by definition the status quo, and incumbents don't want the status quo to change. And unfortunately, politicians are often listening much more to the incumbents than they are to the people who want to try to create, a modern, a more modern, technologically advanced economy, which we need to do in Canada. So yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, the government often talks a good game, but we haven't really seen the kind of investment or even the strategic approach to developing a more sophisticated industrial economy, right? Like we didn't see that in the last 10 years. So I'm hoping. I mean, Carney obviously is a very smart guy who understands global markets and finance and trade. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to bring his kind of thinking and experience to the government and can break through. I mean, talking about incumbents, we've got all kinds of incumbents sitting in Ottawa who like the status quo too. So there's incumbency everywhere, and hopefully Mark Carney will be able to break through that, because that's another pretty tough one to break through, is the kind of the Ottawa system.
Yeah, the more I have these kinds of conversations, Bruce, the more I think that the place to start is with Canadians, because
Yeah.
Ralph Klein used to say, and again for our American viewers, he was the former Premier of Alberta, and very outspoken, very conservative. But he said one thing that I really agree with. He said politicians don't lead; they find a parade and they get out in front of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you want change, don't wait for the politicians to bring change to the table because they won't. Create the parade and hope and create the conditions which the politicians will then get in front of your parade. And we very much see Canada 2050 as maybe the beginning of a parade. And we need, as Canadians, to be talking about these kinds of ideas, have conversations, bring in our neighbors, bring in our families, around the holiday dinner table, whatever it is. But we need to start talking about this stuff because Trump has focused our attentions.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Bruce, thank you very much for this. Always a pleasure, man. I'm sure we'll have you back in the near future.
Great, great. Thank you, Markham. Always a pleasure too.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.